I'm Al, one of the founders of Koii. I'd love to hear from all of you about what you want to learn. If not, we're going to go through some slides that I have about kind of the background of things, and yeah, we'll pop through kind of some details about how Koii works, what to do building on Koii. Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just unmute your mic and talk.
Hi, by the way, my name is Marcin. From the agenda I saw there, it's like that's pretty much on point. I've been running a node for a while, and I became intrigued in the tasks that I was running. And yeah, so it seems like we're going to touch on those kinds of things. Namely, the one that interests me is the kinds of apps that are a good fit in the use cases.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that one. All right. Seems like we got a decent group of people in here, so we'll start kicking things off. Thank you all for joining us. If you want to turn your camera on, you can. If not, no stress. At any point during this presentation, if you have questions, you can drop them into the chat, and I'll try to reply to them as quickly as I can. To kick things off, I guess it helps to understand a little bit about Koii, what we've been trying to do here. The big thing about Koii, obviously, is usually when you're working on a blockchain node or working with blockchain, it looks something like this. And that's not where we want to be going with these kinds of things. What we're trying to do with Koii more so is get you into this kind of a world where you're working on a very simple interface. And what we've tried to do is also make the developer experience pretty easy to use this. So today what I'll show you how to do is to add the easy sandbox task into your own Koii node. So that's going to help you get started to actually build something. I'll also, before we get into that, show you a little bit about Koii and some details about the ecosystem so you have some context. Here's kind of a rough breakdown of what Koii has looked like over the last little while. So we have pretty much 88,000 nodes now. It's been going up, probably about 1,000 a week for the last little while. We get pretty big spikes in that number too. If you've been following the project for a while, you know that way back in December we launched this. We had something like 2,000 nodes. It was just steadily climbing for a long time, and then we got some pretty big traction this year, and things have just been absolutely accelerating. The network's built on Solana, so we have our own fork of the Solana blockchain. It does about 43 transactions per second, so it's very quick for most applications. One of the big advantages of Koii, though, is unlike most blockchains where you have to pay gas fees or transaction fees to keep all the data on chain, when you build on Koii, you're actually able to keep everything in your node. And so these nodes, these 88,000 devices around the world are actually hosting all of the content for you. And what we're working on releasing in the next couple of weeks is the ability for you to launch your own token to this community. So that's hopefully going to make this a lot easier for all of you. It means that from an economics perspective, you're not going to have to actually pay Koii tokens as much, which means things will be a little bit more efficient for your system long term. So hopefully what that means is you can launch something on Koii from day one that's for the community, by the community. And we're here to help you do that. So without further ado, I'll go over a few of the developer background resources. And if somebody from the Koii team, I think Kelly's in here, or Api, if you guys can go ahead and approve anybody that's coming in, that would be great. And I'll try not to spend too much time clicking the button there. Thanks, Kelly. Cool. So here's the main point here. Thank you, Jeff. So the main thing here with Koii is you've got all these devices. Each of these nodes, as we call them, those are people with this app installed. And if they run your task, that's going to mean that you're able to basically offer them some kind of a token or Koii tokens to run some job for you. That's where the real value of the network comes from, because you can then recruit all these devices to support whatever you're trying to build yourself. Typically, in most software environments, you have to pay somebody like Amazon Web Services or Azure Cloud to host your application. And so this makes things a lot. This is really for the back end of your app, but Koii is going to offer you the ability to do things a lot more smoothly. So what we offer at Koii, there's a whole docs portal. So if you go to our website, if you are a developer and you haven't started building on Koii yet, the easiest way to get started is to go through the Easy Sandbox. If you click this build button here, it takes you through the Easy Sandbox tutorial. And we have a whole set of lessons and code samples for you. The nice thing, though, is each of these lessons is designed to make it a little bit easier for you to understand what's going on. And so we've broken them up into all these nice simple parts. For the sake of today's demo, I'll go over what all the parts are so that you get some context, and then we'll go through lesson one ourselves. So we go into the getting started section here. It gives you some of the, actually, let's go back up to the top. So we go to the top, you've got a kind of a menu of all the things you can learn how to do on Koii. So we have a short introduction to Koii tasks, which is what we'll cover today. There's a networking and storage task, which is going to give you some context on like how to actually make your nodes work together. So one of the things that's tricky with this is you're traditionally building on a cloud environment. You usually have one big server. With Koii, you've got lots of little tiny ones, so getting them to talk to each other can be a little tricky. We've done a lot of hard work to make that easy for you. And what you're getting in the networking and storage task is some tips on how to use UPnP to actually get the nodes to talk to each other. And then we also show you how to use IPFS for the storage side of things. We also have some support for secrets, which is how you can get nodes to give you private access to different websites. So this can be really useful if you're trying to download information off of Twitter or other websites. Can be very useful for AI projects in particular. Audits and distributions are also a really important part of this framework. That's where you can verify the work that the nodes are doing and make sure that they've actually done the work correctly. So we'll go through a little bit of that and talk about how to write good audits. And then we've got some lessons on security and hardening and using custom tokens, which we won't get into the using custom tokens today, but we'll probably have a follow-up workshop to go over that. We have this final step here, lesson 7, on deploying a Koii task. So that'll cover some of the stuff that people have asked about, which kind of helps you go through the actual process of getting your task out onto the network, getting it whitelisted so that it'll actually appear in the node here. And then finally, we have some tips on performance improvements as well. One thing I should note as well, Koii is currently being audited. So the K2 blockchain, which is the core of the network, has already been audited, and we have the full report available here. The task node itself, this one, is in the process of being audited, but we're iterating really fast on it right now. So it's not in a place where we want to open source it. It'll probably be open source later this year. With that being said, though, if you go into any one of these tasks, you can click on the Inspect Code button right here, and that's going to open up the actual code base for that task. And so this task in particular has all of its code right here, so you can go and inspect what's running on your computer. And the desktop node actually does check that the code that's being run on the device is going to match that repo. And so if the code that's published on GitHub, like this one, mask task, if this code doesn't match what's in the desktop node, then the node won't run the task at all. So you can always be sure that whatever you're running on your Koii node is 100% open source and super reliable. Some other kind of neat things that you can do with the node, just while we're on the topic, if you click on this task ID here, it's going to open up the block explorer. And you get this nice interface that shows you the task data and the history. So you can see all the transaction history, and this is all the nodes interacting with that task. And you can see that they're happening very fast. This is just kind of a couple minutes of transaction data. So each one of these transactions is data getting passed up from the nodes into this task. You can see tokens if there were any token holdings. This particular task doesn't have any. And you can see domains, but there's none attached to this one. So if you go into this task data here, what you get is the breakdown of the actual task object. This is a good place to start. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, what we're seeing here is we've got the task name and then a variable. So the task name is the name of the variable, and there's a value in that field. And so this just kind of gives you the breakdown of all the different pieces of the task and kind of how they fit together. And I'll zoom my screen a little bit here so you can see more clearly. So most of these are at the top are just kind of default kind of metadata that we need to input for each task. We also then have things like the task audit program. And so if we right click on this one, or if we just click on it, it opens up the actual main.js, which is the build file that represents this mask task here. So this task object in here builds out to a single file, and that's what ends up in the IPFS page here. And so this main.js represents the actual full build of that task object, and that's what ends up on IPFS, and that's what the nodes are running in the background. So when you click play, what you're actually doing is telling the node to run that main.js file. So hopping back over to the block explorer here, you can also see the submissions, which is a pretty important one. So submissions are each round, the nodes need to send something up to the blockchain to prove that they did work. And they're going to be doing that by adding some kind of an object, and you can click through these to see what's happening. When you see one of these things that starts with BAFY, that's actually a payload. And those payloads are actually all stored on IPFS, so they're not on the blockchain, but we anchor them onto the blockchain. And because they're hash references, they represent the data set that's on IPFS very accurately. And if you were to change something on IPFS, then this hash reference won't work anymore, which is really important because that's how we ensure that everything that's on the chain is attached to like real world events that have happened. And if you want to learn more about that, the keyword to look up is called a CID or a content ID. on IPFS. And there's a whole section here in the IPFS docs that explains how those work. The main thing to understand, though, is it's just like hashing something. So when you hash something, if you change anything in the input, the output changes as well. Maybe we can get a graphic of how that works, actually. And for anybody who's a very advanced programmer, some of this might be a little bit boring, but I want to make sure everybody's included. So here's a good example. So with a hash, you have some input that runs through the hash function, and then it creates some output. And what you'll see is if you change one letter here, so over to over, the hash output's completely different for those two objects. And that's really important because that means that the input has to stay the same in order to get the same output. And what we do with content addressing is we actually go the other way. So we start with this object and we use it to find this data set. And you can't find the data set unless you've got the exact correct hash. And so the reason that that's important inside of this block explorer is each of these submissions represents one very specific data object in the world. And if you change the submission value, then you don't get the same data object. And that ensures that everything that's going on-chain is attached to a bunch of real-world data that's stored on some of these nodes. And if you click through these, you can see all the data inside of the submission object. And here's some tweets, because the mask task is actually going and scraping Elon Musk's Twitter account. A little bit rebellious on the mask team. They are a decentralized social network, so they're trying to compete with Twitter. And I think monitoring things like Elon's accounts are kind of a fun way to go through it. So that's a little bit about how the task nodes actually work. What we'll do very quickly is I want to show you guys how the runtime flow works, which you can actually get a really nice graphic for this out of our white paper. So I mentioned first, this build button here takes you over to the Easy Sandbox. But if you go right down to the bottom of our website, down here, you get the white paper, just right here. And in the white paper, we've got a lot of really good graphics that cover how all these pieces fit together. One important one is this concept of scales. This is kind of what we were just talking about with the hashing. So the whole thing with the nodes is they're creating all of these data objects, which can be really, really big data sets. One of the big problems with blockchains is getting a lot of data on chain can be very expensive because there's only so many copies of the blockchain. And you can't add data to the blockchain very easily. It's usually an expensive thing. So if you wanted to add, for example, 1 kilobyte to the Bitcoin blockchain, that costs about $10,000. If you wanted to add 1 kilobyte to the Ethereum blockchain, that costs about $1,000. So we want to put as little amount of data on the blockchain as we can because it makes the whole thing a lot more scalable. So what we do instead is we take all these big data blocks that are stored out on all these desktop nodes, we compress those into hashes, and then we hash those hashes together to get the top hash. And that top hash is the only thing that goes on chain. And so that's what you're seeing here in the task submission data. So each one of these submission rounds, these are each rounds, by the way, 106, 107, et cetera. Each one of those has a list of these submission objects, and those are the top hashes that each node did. And so you can see this as 1,200 different nodes that made submissions in round 107, and each one of those submitted a hash here. And so that's important because what that means is each one of these objects can contain a lot more data inside of it. So we go back and look at that other one that we were looking at before. There's 4 items. Let's see. Yeah, so there's 10 different tweets that were submitted by this particular node ID. And so each one of these is one. And so these rounds run pretty regularly. And then what we do with them is each time that one of these objects is submitted, we're actually going to audit those submissions as well. So I'll scroll down here and show you the audit cycle. So each round of work that happens, there's a time period called the round time for each task, and you can set them yourself. You can also see them in the node here. So this task has a 2-hour round time. The Easy Sandbox testing task is a 13-minute round time, 29 minutes for Bumbacat, and you can kind of see that in each one. The reason that you set these round times is after each round, then the audits are happening for the previous work that was done. So we submit a something on chain, in this case, a hash ID. So that hash ID that we saw in the block explorer here represents the work that was submitted on chain by this particular node. And once it's submitted on chain here, then the other nodes are going to audit it using a function that they have locally. And so in the case of like Twitter crawlers and things like that, all that we do to audit those is we take the submission on chain and then we go and we run an audit over it. And usually the audit is just repeating the same process that was done previously. In most cases, that's actually how this is going to work. We'll get into some other edge cases after this, though, as we go through the actual code base. Before I continue with kind of going through the Koii stack, I think it's probably a good idea for us to take some questions for a second, and then we'll get into a little bit more of an interactive session where we actually go and build a Koii task and try out the Easy Sandbox. So I see a whole bunch of questions that are popping up in the chat here. I'm going to try to just go through them one by one for a second, and then we'll kind of step back. If anybody has their microphone and camera on, you get priority questions because it's a little bit easier for me to hear you if you're talking as opposed to going through this chat over and over again. I see, can we conclude that solutions involving proprietary data are not advisable on Koii? So this is an interesting point. You can actually use proprietary data as long as you're able to generate some kind of a proof. That would be a good application for ZK proofs. And so when you make these submissions on chain, you can actually make a ZK proof as the submission. And as long as the other nodes can verify it, then you can do a proof over private data pretty easily, and it should work fine. We don't have any sample code on how to do that, but we can definitely help you out. Scrolling up a bit here, I've got Crypto Mana, who said, who are Koi's competitors, Arweave, ICP, or Holochain? We don't really see any of these as competitors. We're actually pretty good friends with the Holochain guys, and we previously worked a lot more with Arweave. ICP doesn't really run on personal devices as much, so it's sort of more complementary tool. So you could write a Koii task that uses ICP for some parts, but then uses Koii for others. The personal devices on Koii are a huge advantage, though, because you can pay in just about any token starting next week. And so those kinds of things that you would do on ICP can actually be broken down into smaller jobs. And as opposed to paying with the ICP token, you can pay with Koii directly. So it should be a big advantage. We've also tried to make Koii really easy to use. So it should save you a lot of time in terms of launching these things. We'll go through that easy sandbox a little bit more closely. You can follow it there. See Nicholas Dealey, hoping that, sorry, I can't read your message exactly. It says, I'm in grad school. I want to do my capstone project this quarter. And I want to discuss to see if we could have a stakeholder chat. Okay, cool. We'd love to get you involved. I think that's a good use case for our grants program. You can find the application for that on our website as well. Koii is, sorry, someone there?
No, thank you, sir.
Cool, yeah, love to get you involved. I see Abid asked if Koii is Rust-based. So at the blockchain layer, when you write smart contracts, you do need to write those in Rust. You can also write them in C, which is an option. It's very similar to Solana. So if you follow the Solana docs, you can deploy everything onto the Koii RPCs the same way. There's a whole section in our docs, though, about deploying things onto K2. So I'll pull that up really quick. So you got K2 integration hooks. That one's for Finney. K2 blockchain here. And what you'll find is the RPCs for the blockchain are the same structure as Solana. And so once you get our RPC endpoint, which we can go RPC. If you go through these RPC methods here, you can see how to interact with the blockchain. And it's extremely similar to Solana, except you're just using a different RPC endpoint. We have a developer help section of our Discord as well, where you can ask these kinds of questions, and we'll give you a little bit more in-depth help. Scrolling up a little bit more, I'd like to know about the current settings when deploying a task, how to properly load it onto IPFS. We'll definitely go through that shortly. And I think that's most of the questions so far. Does anybody have any other questions that we need to go through before we can proceed? Going once, going twice. Cool. That makes things a little easier. So what we'll go into now, I mentioned this before about how Koii uses rounds of work. So the other layer of this is these rounds also run concurrently. So whenever there's one work period happening, there's usually two previous rounds that are also still happening. So there's one review period for the last round and one distribution period for the round 2 rounds back. These things are all layered on top of each other so that you always have one active work period. So if you need to host an API or something like that, that's how that works out. So let's hop back over to the easy sandbox. So if we go back to Koii.network and we click on the build tab here, it's going to take us into the easy sandbox, and we can click this start your lessons here. If anybody is technical and wants to follow along, this might be a good time to do that. What we're going to do to get started is we'll get the GitHub link out of here, and we can go ahead and clone that. I'll try and pop this guy out, actually. Might make it a little bit easier. There we go. Cool. And we'll get a terminal up so we can play with this guy. And maybe we'll go homebrew. A little bit more fun. So step one, as always, let's clone the GitHub repo. So we'll make a new directory, Say Koii webinar. And we'll do a git clone that repo. So now we've got that guy in there. I prefer VS Code for this kind of stuff as like a nice, easy, standard interface. We have some Koii VS Code plugins hopefully coming out in the future as well. So that should make things a little bit easier for you. We'll go ahead and open up that new project in VS Code. And here's that Easy Sandbox project. So once you've got the Easy Sandbox downloaded, you'll want to go through some of these early lessons. So probably lesson 1 is the easiest place to start. Each lesson has its own task inside of it. And so you can actually check into these guys, and there's sort of a lesson plan that you can follow along with. In the first one, it's this Easy Sandbox testing task folder. So we'll get in there. And now we're inside of the project folder here. So the main thing that you're going to look at, this prod debug is pretty critical here. Let me see if I can just get the lesson plan up on the left and we can follow along. So we'll step through these examples here and talk about a little bit of why Koii is in there, why we're using Koii. So the most of this is stuff we've already talked about, and you do need the desktop node installed for these tutorials. That's because what we're going to do is actually get this Easy Sandbox testing task in here to run with what we want it to run with. So if we step through the kind of tutorial here a little bit, you'll see there's an advanced button in the Koii task, or in the Koii node rather. And in this advanced thing, you can enter your task ID. So I'm already running the Easy Sandbox testing task, but I'll see if we can look it up anyways. Yeah, it's already been started. But if you do this yourself, you'll be able to stake on that task and start running it. And that's how you get it to appear in the desktop node on the front. So that's your easy testing task here. If we step down a little bit further through this, it walks us through some things like what is the task ID. So the task ID is actually a hash of the account that the task owns. Each task has its own bounty account, which is where the tokens that are in the task live. And so that's the stake tokens, the reward tokens that will go out to you, and a variety of stuff like that. That's kind of the whole point of tasks, though, is that they distribute rewards. So with many of the projects that we've built in the past, the money gets paid into that bounty pool, and then it gets distributed out to the node operators. So you're actually, when you're running a task, you're participating in a giant multi-sig address that's handing out tokens to people. If you don't know what a multi-sig is, basically what that means is you have a whole bunch of devices that are verifying the work done so that they can take money out of that bounty pool and give it to the other node operators. And each task ID represents one of those wallets that everybody's running. And so each task has its own little bank account, and then they can hand out money to the people who are participating. That's also particularly cool because what it means you can do is you can run tasks that have, basically take money in from customers, which we would call like a distributed corporation. And then money can get handed out of those tasks by the task nodes themselves. If we run this task now, you'll be able to see the task logs. We'll pull that up. If you get a terminal, if you're on a Unix-based system, you can type in tail-f and then click and drag that task log. You can start following the task. And right now the task isn't running, so you won't see anything changing here. But if we start this task again, or if we stop the task and then start it again, you'll see that this is now updated, and we're going to start seeing logs pumping out. The Easy Sandbox testing task doesn't do a lot, so there's not much happening in this right now. You can try this with any task in your Koii node, though, and you'll be able to see what's happening under the hood. So we'll hop back into the tutorial now. That's our task.log. You can get the main.log file. There's also a upmp.log for some projects. Certain tasks also support UPnP, which is a way of tunneling for REST APIs. And so there's a few different log files that will start to appear in there. But whenever you have a different process log, you'll start to see them all pop up in that folder. The actual folder might differ for you. I find the best way to do it is to actually use this output logs button to get to the right folder. And what you'll see here is actually the structure of the task node. So there's a whole bunch of different project files in here. You've got log files for your node at the top level, and then inside the namespace, each node or each task on the node has its own folder. And so you can see them each here with their own sub items inside of them. And so this makes it pretty easy to go and actually look through all the code base inside of your tasks. You'll also see that there's executables, which are the raw files And these are the raw files for each task. And this is the actual, this is the file that will run in the background on your computer when you press play on that task. The other things you'll see in here is some metadata files for each project. These are human readable. So if we pop one of these guys open, and let's say fields in there, that's the same file that you'll see in your task node, or sorry, in your VS Code under the config task.yaml. And so you'll be able to modify all of these parameters here. And that's actually how you specify what you need from the end user. And so you can set requirement tags here. As long as you follow this type value here, it should appear properly inside the node. And so you'll be able to configure any requirements that you have. So for example, if we wanted to say, I need a GPU, we put GPU, and then size 100 GB. So that can be a good way of configuring system requirements that you need. You can also use this for putting in something like bandwidth. And say maybe you need a 1 gigabit connection. And so this is a good way of kind of identifying which type of node you want to run the task. This all appears in the task node as well. And we're working on making these a little bit more intuitive so that you'll be able to specify the types of devices that you want to recruit. Outside of the config, you also have a bunch of files inside this repo. I'll give a quick tour of those, and then we'll go into how you can actually test them. So inside the task folder here, you have a submission function, which is the actual task function and runs every round. And this is where we will prepare that submission object that we talked about submitting on-chain. That's this one that ends up inside of the blockchain. So during this period, first the submission function here runs, and then after the submission runs, then the next function that runs is this audit function. And the audit function we call validate node, and it takes a submission value here and a round number, and then it can iterate over that. And you'll see that the default here just returns true, which makes it nice and simple. Finally, after there's a submission and an audit phase, then we get into the distribution phase. There's a little bit of lag time here, which allows you to extend the audit window and the submission window as much as you want to. You can configure both of those from this config file as well. If you wanted to make the windows for each of those longer, you can change those here. And that allows you to decide what the timing should be so that you can actually configure your task to run properly. After the submission and then the audit, then the next phase is the distribution, where we actually create a rewards profile for each node. So if you go into this function, you'll see a template of how that works. The key thing here, and I'll zoom out a bit so you can see it. The key thing is the distribution also gets audited again. And so that's how we secure this against bad actors. And so one node from your group will actually make a submission, and then the other nodes will all look at that and audit it using the second function, which is called audit distribution. And generally speaking, the audit distribution is basically the same as generating the distribution. They're almost identical, because what we want to do is one person does the work, and then everybody else verifies that the work was done correctly. And as long as that works consistently, then you're able to have pretty good consensus between the nodes, and you can avoid doing this kind of constant checking of all the work. What you can also do is you can have some nodes ignore the audit phase. And so you can have nodes audit, say, one other node, or only a small group of nodes do the audits, which can reduce the replication factor. Replication factor effectively means how many nodes did we pay to do each part of the task. And if you have to pay a lot of nodes to do the task, then you end up back in that same problem of Bitcoin, where putting 1 kilobyte of data on Bitcoin costs a lot of money. And that's because there's so many Bitcoin nodes that every time that you put something on Bitcoin, you have to get all of those nodes to copy it, and that makes it very crowded. So what we try to do on Koii is we try to do everything as few times as possible with the maximum level of security. And so you're constantly creating these optimizations of, I want this thing to be more secure, so I'm going to get more people to do it, or I want this thing to be a little less secure, but I want to do it really cheap. And that's where you can get less people to do it, but you can kind of save some money. So there's some very flexible parameters here that allows you to do a lot of that. And if you scroll down through this generate distribution list, you'll see what they're effectively doing is pulling in the list of all of the people who have made submissions. So the task state list, their stake list rather, is the number of people who have staked on that task. And then we're iterating over that so that we can find all the submissions and then verify the submissions and count how valuable they are. So you can look at all of those submission objects, which we looked at on chain here. And so you can think of this function kind of like if you were to open this up and then manually, you could look at each one of these submissions from each person. So this is one submission. This is another submission from a different node. It's another one. And you could look at each of these and score them to decide how valuable they are. And that's effectively what's happening in this distribution function, which I'll leave it to you guys to read the code yourself, but it's kind of the core premise of it. The other thing that's happening in here is you have this prod debug function, which I'm particularly proud of as like a very useful tool. What this does is it builds the file for you. So it's going to build the executable, which we can do that here anyways. We can do yarn. And that's just to install any package dependencies. This might take a sec because it's the first time that we've installed this program. The cool thing about this, though, what we're going to do with building the file is we take all of these different files and build them into one Webpack file, and that's the one that actually runs on the node. That's important because that means that on every node, we have the same dependencies, and we have a guarantee that if that Webpack file changes by even 1 byte, we know that it's potentially malicious. And so that's how we avoid running the wrong code on our Koii nodes, because otherwise, all of these 88,000 people who are running the Koii node could potentially get hacked at the same time, and that would be really bad. So okay, the yarn has continued there, and then we'll do yarn webpack prod. And this is going to output a new file, a new folder, and a new file here called the build file. So we get this distribution and then main.js. And so this is what you're actually running on your Koii node, but it's the same no matter you build it on any other device. And so the good news is, as long as this file is the same size as the one that's running on your node, then everything's fine. So the last thing here that we're going to do as a part of the testing process is we have this executables folder in our node. And remember, we got to here from the Koii desktop node and then the executables. And if you weren't here when we got that, the easy way to find it is to go and grab the output logs. And then you get this kind of folder. And so this executables folder here, these are the actual code runtimes on your node. And so what we're going to do is we're going to copy that build file into the desktop node and then run it again. And that doesn't sound super exciting, but the cool thing there is it avoids you having to upload it to IPFS before you run it on your node. And so you can test things a lot quicker this way without having to go through the full process of deploying the task and then running it again. And so we just use that easy sandbox testing task to run the same task over and over again. And what this prod debug functionality is going to do is it's going to make it extremely easy for you to just sit here and change files. And every time that you change a file, we're going to be watching for it, and then we're going to copy the Webpack file over into your desktop node. And so it's going to save you a lot of time in terms of configuration, because every time that you save a file, it's going to rebuild the whole Webpack executable, put that in your desktop node, and all you're going to have to do is click start. So we'll go through a full demo of that right now. If you want to see how all these things fit together, you can come in here and look at the script section of your package.json. And what we're going to see here is prod debug just runs this node mon. I think there's one configuration step that we need to go through as well. So we're going to get our env variable here. So this is env example, and we'll just save this guy again as just env. This task ID here should be the Easy Sandbox task ID, so we can check that it matches. If we go over here to our Easy Sandbox task, you'll see that it's this one. We'll just copy that, hop back over here, and paste it in there. You can see that it does match, so we should be all good. One final point that we'll get into is you can use a specific keyword to debug your task. And so if you were to make a console.log and you wanted to separate it from the rest of the logs in this file, you can add a test keyword here. So in this case, we'll call it webinar. And in the, let's say, an index or in submission, we can make a log here that says okay, so now we're ready to try this out. So we'll do the next step, which is running the prod debug functionality. And if we hop back down to package.json, so we just have to type yarn prod debug. Okay, and so it has copied the Webpack file into the correct file. inside of our desktop node, and you can see the path here matches up with what we were expecting, and now it's inside of our desktop node. And what we'll notice here is that the Easy Sandbox testing task is still running, so we're going to pause that and then play it again. So now we're actually running the code base that we transferred over there. And what we can also do on our desktop node is we can see all of the tasks that are running by using the REST API. And so you can go localhost 3000 or 30,017/tasks. That gives you all of the tasks that are running on your node. So we can see that this node has the ADOT search AI, the hashtag 420 Twitter indexer, and the Easy Sandbox testing task. And so that one's there. Once you get the task ID, you can tunnel down a bit and you can paste this in. And you can see the status of the task. And so this path here is /task/task ID. And then you can go one layer deeper and you can say task state, and you can get the full task state for that object. And so now that this node is running the task, it's actually showing up on the node REST API. This is very helpful for debugging because we can then add something into this task state. So as a kind of a demo of how that works, we'll hop over here again, and we can go into the REST API configurations, which are in our routes.js file. And that's going to be down here. Sorry, index.js. And so we can change something in this task state, and we can potentially add another variable, or we can add a new REST endpoint as an example. Actually, let's do that. So let's call this webinar. And instead of using the get store, we can just add a result here. So we'll say hello and world. So this is going to run here is a call to our REST API, and you can use that same console hook here. So we'll do webinar. And so what we'll expect to see when we run this is we'll save this file, and that's going to make the whole thing rebuild, and you'll see it webpacked again. And so now if we hit this endpoint /webinar on this node, we can do /task/ID/webinar. Oh, we stopped the task, right? So one thing to keep in mind is whenever that task file gets copied over, your node is going to stop because it says, oh no, the task file changed. We could be getting hacked. So you have to manually go in and restart it. And it's actually also giving you a notification saying the task will need to be restarted. But it's also really important that it shows you this because otherwise somebody could change your executable file on you and it could get it to do something nefarious. So we have some kind of safeguards in place to make that a little easier for you. So now that we're running the task again, we can go back here and we'll hit this endpoint. It says hello world. And then if we hop back over to the node, we'll see that it says webinar test ran, which is our console.log output here. So you can add these kinds of REST endpoints in, and you can do a lot of auditing and layers of work there. I see there's still a whole bunch of people here listening in. If anybody has any questions, this is probably a good time to talk through them. I also have some slides we'll go through kind of talking about how to secure your Koii tasks now that we've got this basic example in place. So anyone have any remaining questions or anything that they didn't understand so far on this part? That was definitely the more technical part of the session. So if you stuck it through this far, thank you. And we'll go through kind of like a little bit more non-tech examples now as well. Okay, not seeing any other questions at this point. So we'll talk through a few of these slides. Looks like we have about 10 minutes left. Is that right? Oh, no, we've got, yeah, a little bit of time. Cool. So the peer-to-peer security stuff is pretty important here. If you're not familiar with this stuff, like if you're coming from the Web 2 environment, it can be a little tricky. Okay, Laksha says she searched localhost 30,017 in her Chrome and got nothing. So you have to be running your desktop node for that to work. You'll also want to try running it with localhost. So we have HTTP //localhost 30,017, and then try the /tasks endpoint. you're running the node. Actually, let's do this as a quick interactive exercise. Everyone who's here, try typing this into your browser, and if you're running your Koii node, it should pop up.
Only like a portion of your screen is showing, and we can't see what. At least I can't see what you're typing. Just a heads up.
Oh, interesting. It's showing the Chrome window.
So yeah, I see like the bottom. Yeah, okay. You moved up, so I can see that. When you move up like that, I can see the Chrome window better. But right now, I see like the bottom right corner. I see like the bottom right corner of node. Node is running.
I see. Okay. Can you guys see this now?
I can. I don't know
Yes.
about others. Cool.
Yes, we can.
So if you guys all have the desktop node installed, let's try opening that URL that I just sent. Make sure that your node is running and turned on. As long as your node is on, you should be able to open this page. Let's just double check that everybody can do that. Nice, got a couple more people. That's great. And so then the point of this example is to show you that you can type in /tasks after this, and you get a list of all your tasks, which is a really good way of debugging what's going on inside your node, because you can use the node kind of just like you're running a little REST API server on your device. And it's kind of like having a bunch of little virtual machines in your device that you can run all the software on, which makes it actually a lot easier to set these things up. And it's going to save you a lot of time if you're using the REST API for debugging instead of trying to debug it from the command line. Looks like Laksha is still having a hard time there. Laksha, are you able to open up this URL? Awesome. Let's see if the fireworks work. Boom. There we go. Cool. Great to see that you guys are able to get that part working at least. As you start to debug this, going through those REST API steps is going to make things a lot easier. It's a really easy way to test out internal functions because you can kick things off from inside of that REST API. So for example, you can write some function down here. And then that's going to go and redeploy it right over to the desktop node again. Go back over here and click play again. And now when we ping this endpoint, we ping our web. Oh, well, we could redo this one actually. Do the thing. So you can trigger some kind of a secondary function here, which can make it a little bit easier to test database access types of functionality. It's going to save you from having to try to rerun everything or try to kind of kick things off using the task sequencing. Because as mentioned, the submission and the audit and distribution run kind of in sequence. And so if you're trying to test something without using those, using the REST API to test them can be a really straightforward way of doing it. You can also use test functions, which is another option. Then we'll type in this webinar one again right here. So what I'm doing there, I've got this path, same path as before, 30,017/task/the task ID for the easy sandbox, and then this /webinar endpoint. I've set up that /webinar endpoint to now call this new function that I have called do the thing. And so I haven't restarted the task yet. So if I try and call it now, we're going to get nothing. It's going to say it's not running. If we go back to the node and we start the task, you'll see it increment over here. And then over here, we can say, boom, hello world. And then now it says, we did the thing. So this can be a really good way of testing supporting functions and making sure things are working kind of in flow. It's a lot faster to restart it this way and run them inside the node. I also really encourage people to try to test things in just like raw JavaScript files before you put them inside your task. Because running a task requires you to put it inside the node environment to run the task fully with all the features. But if you can test it outside the node first and do it with just raw JavaScript, then you can put it into the node a little later and it saves a lot of time. So lots of options there. Looks like, yeah, a couple people said it's working. Cool. Does anybody have any more questions at this point? Or if you do, just drop them into the chat and we can go through them. That's kind of the first step of this process. We also have one last part of this, which is using the create task CLI. So we'll configure that here as well. So if we go create task CLI, I've got it installed globally already. If you wanted to install it yourself, what you want to do is type npm I _Koii / create task CLI. And that's going to install the task. I'm going to cancel it so I can show you where that is really quick. So we go back to the easy sandbox and then scroll down to the deployment step right here, deploying your Koii task. We cover some of the stuff and some tips and tricks in here. Oh, and you can also run it with npx as well, actually, which means you don't even have to install it locally. So we can try doing it that way. There we go. Say yes. That goes ahead and installs. And so now what we're doing is deploying our task onto the network, so it's live for everybody. And then if we do deploy a task here, we say deploy a new task. It says, would you like to use your node's key? So this is grabbing the key that we have inside of our desktop node. And so we're going to pay to deploy it using this balance. And if you need tokens to deploy it, you can always ask in our Discord, and our team will give you some free tokens to help you deploy tasks. You can see it says using CLI or config.yaml. If we click using CLI here, it's going to step us through filling in all of this information that's in the config.yaml file. So it asks you a lot of questions in a row, and you just have to type in an answer for each of them. To speed things up, instead, we're just going to use the config file that we already have here, this config task. But we can change the task name as an example. So we use the config.yaml, then it'll grab that out of the local folder. And then the last step here is this using Koii storage SDK. One thing with this that's pretty important is if you haven't actually used the faucet yet, then you won't be able to use the Koii storage SDK. And this is because we need to control who can push data onto our IPFS cluster. Because we've got all these Koii nodes that are hosting things on IPFS, and we want to make sure that those stay safe and that we don't get DDoS by people. And so if you haven't gone through our faucet yet, then you need to go through that. Pull that up over here, actually, really quick. There we go. So you can go faucet.koii.network, and then this needs to be your wallet ID. You can also get there by clicking on this add funds, and then clicking get free tokens, and that'll open up the same page. And as long as you've verified at least one of these methods, then you'll be able to use the faucet IPFS cluster. And so then you can click this using Koii storage SDK here, and you can say yes. And it says form data is not defined. Okay, small book. I think this might be a problem with my node in particular, actually, because mine doesn't have the email verified. But most of you shouldn't have too much trouble with that. And we have some follow-up webinars and help from our Discord team as well. So if you run into issues there, we can help you through it. What I wanted to show before we kind of wrap things up is some tips and tricks on how to actually use Koii. Oh, I see a couple of questions, actually. Is TypeScript supported? Yes, that TypeScript is definitely supported. So you can use TypeScript, or you can compile Rust into WASM. So anything you can get into WASM can run inside of a Koii task for sure. Carol asked, is this going to be recorded? Yes, this is recorded. And anybody who signed up will get a autopilot link after this. So you'll actually be able to go through the whole thing, and there'll be some kind of summary and some other information published afterwards. We do also run these regularly. And we have all the steps detailed much more clearly in the easy sandbox, so that should help as well. Pius asked, can you throw more light on the config task executable network? Yes. So the task executables also support other networks. So you can also put this on Arweave, or if you put it on development, it'll just run locally on your device. So it doesn't actually need to be deployed. The problem is, of course, if you do it in development mode, nobody else can access that task executable. So until it's on IPFS or Arweave, then you can't actually get other people to run it on their node, because they would have to download it from you, and they don't have access to your computer. If you do it on Arweave, you have to have a balance of Arweave tokens. That step takes a little bit more time. Tasks deployed to Arweave will be permanent, or at least as permanent as Arweave is. So I'd recommend starting with IPFS for this, and then if you have a specific use case in the future, our team can help you to try and take advantage of that. Cool. That's probably all the questions for now, or at least it seems like they are. Carol, if you have a specific question that you want help with right now, we can also step through kind of the, we can step through anything that you're confused about. Feel free to just ask by turning on your microphone, or put a bit more messages in the chat, and I can try to help you. In the meantime, I want to talk a little bit about peer-to-peer security and the things that we have run into here. Some of the stuff that we've talked about so far has a lot to do with cryptography. We also use incentives and reputation to do really clean systems. The trick here is cryptography is how we kind of manage identity on these networks. So in Web 2, you have like HTTPS, like the green lock on your browser, or you have like OAuth. Hi, Alu. We're going to mainnet hopefully in the next 2 months. Sort of depends on the exchanges and things like that, but we're queued up, so that'll be happening really soon. I can't say more on that right now, but there's going to be a community public sale next month where all of you who are running nodes will be able to participate. That happens through Koii.network/ocean, actually, I guess if we're on the topic. So you can go to this platform and you can sign up here. And if you sign up here and you want to become part of the Ocean crowd sale, you can actually buy tokens directly from the Koii team. After that, we'll be having another sale on Paid Ignition, which is another launchpad, and we have one other launchpad called ChangeGPT that we're also working with. Once all of those launchpads are complete and we've kind of given people a chance to buy the tokens and get in before the public markets, then we'll probably list the token shortly thereafter. We've got most of the listings lined up, so that's coming along quickly. Okay, so let's step through that actually. So it says form data is not defined. Sorry, so Carol asked why couldn't we deploy it? The main reason here is my node hasn't actually gone through the faucet because I got my tokens airdropped to me by our tech team, which, sorry, a little lazy. If we click on this one here with email, and then we say, let's say Al, we can't do that one. We'll do Alex Morris. Yeah, you guys are all going to know my personal Gmail. Please don't spam it. I've already used that one. I don't have a spare Gmail, so won't be able to go through this step without making one. The quick way to do that, though, is just go to gmail.com and make a Gmail. So we can do an incognito tab and sign up for another Gmail. Cool. So anybody can make a fake Gmail this way, but the key thing is Google keeps track of your IP address when you do this, and if you try to make a bunch of them at once, then they stop you. So now that we've made a Gmail, we can hop back over to the node, and click this Add Funds button, get some free tokens, get some Koii, email, and then we drop that new email in there. Click Send Code. So now it's sent a code over, and we can go back to our Gmail account. So here's our code. Take this one, we go back to the faucet. We verify email. There we go. So now the 2 tokens have been added to my wallet, but more importantly, my wallet is considered verified from the standpoint of the faucet, which controls who gets to access the IPFS cluster. So now if we go back in here and we repeat that whole deployment process, so npx @create Koii. Go back down here to deploy a new task. Say yes. Using config.yaml, so we'll take the default. Using the Koii storage SDK. Say yes. And same problem. This might be a bug in the latest version, or it could be that I've changed something in here. I haven't deployed one of these in about a week and a half, so it's quite possible that there is just a bug. I'm going to ping one of our tech guys really quick and ask them why this is happening, and maybe we can get some quick feedback from our team. Probably not a huge bug, but probably just a dumb error. Give me one sec, guys. Good issue to find. We have been making a lot of updates. We had a bunch of hackathons for the last couple of weeks, so there's been a number of changes to this SDK pretty recently, and definitely seeing some bugs, which is always good. We probably will get this fixed pretty quick. I just tossed it over to one of my co-founders, Saeed, who's like the head of the technical side, and he's taking a look at it. While we're waiting for that, I'll answer a couple more questions here. Yar, I see you said, what DeFi projects have already been implemented on the Koii network? Is there a place where I can learn about the ecosystem and will be available after launch? So right now what we're doing is crowdfunding a whole bunch of projects that are being launched on Koii. So you can see most of them by running the Koii node. So if you hop into the desktop node, you can see a number of the projects that have launched. So these all have active Koii tasks. We also have a couple of exchanges and some liquid staking protocols that have now been started to deploy. The network's only been up and live for about 2.5 months though. So before that, we were kind of on an extended period of test nets, and we've been debugging a variety of different things. So you might run into mostly new projects. You can also fork anything that's on Solana and redeploy it onto Koii. So that's always an option. Yeah, we're very supportive of trying to help people build stuff. It's definitely early stages though. The end game here is having as many people as we can deploy things on Koii over the next couple months before we launch the token. So we don't want to launch the token until after we have everything pretty stable, which is mostly to make sure the community is able to get involved in the pre-mine before we over-financialize the whole thing. Cool. Tech team's looking at the bug with Easy Sandbox there. We should have an answer soon. But in the meantime, I want to talk a little bit about how we can secure Koii tasks like this. Some of the stuff that we've covered, like the peer-to-peer security, I mentioned cryptography and incentives and reputation. When running tasks, I get the impression that a simple task like Hello World take more resources than normal. Hello World actually deliberately takes a lot of resources because we give out free tokens for the Hello World task. So it takes 1.5 gigabytes of RAM by default. The other tasks you'll find are actually pretty much the same as if you just ran them from the CLI. So if you actually deployed them directly and ran them yourself, then you would probably take up about the same or maybe even less RAM because we have a variety of compression things built in. We have a DEX being built on Koii, Alu, but we would love to have more. An NFT marketplace would also be really exciting. I'm going to launch into a short summary of how the peer-to-peer security stuff works, just while we're waiting for the tech team to get back to us on how the create task CLI works and why that little bug is happening. We can probably get you guys an answer on fixing that pretty shortly here. With the peer-to-peer security side of things, I want to quickly cover a couple of key pieces. With peer-to-peer applications, one of the main things to keep in mind is you're actually saving a lot of costs on hardware. So if you rent hardware from a data center, you can't pay in tokens usually, but more importantly, usually they're going to charge you for I/O and bandwidth, which is a lot cheaper on consumer devices because most people have a pretty fast internet connection. And if you go through a data center, then you're paying to get into their data bottleneck, which can cost a lot of money. There's also a lot of advantages in terms of stability. So what we've seen recently with like the CrowdStrike thing probably doesn't happen as much on decentralized networks. You can get a lot of things to run pretty smoothly by deploying them onto these large clusters of peer devices, because even if like 10% or 50% of the devices go down, there's still devices there that are running. It's very hard to take down the whole network, which can actually happen pretty easily in data centers. There was a recent time when Facebook got locked out of their own data center and they lost access to it. And yet, sorry, YAR, the network does support deployment of any smart contracts that you can deploy on Solana. We've optimized the network now so that we have a little bit more flexible compute and storage flexibility. So you can integrate IPFS storage, and you can also use heap memory a little bit more effectively than you can on Solana. So there's a few different options there. So when it comes down to building these peer-to-peer applications, you get a lot more scale as well than if you were to build directly on a blockchain. And then in some cases, things that are built on peer-to-peer can be a lot more trustworthy for social applications. So if you're building something like a social network or a search engine and you want it to be verifiable, by building it this way with the use of audits and with security from Koii tasks, you're actually kind of by default very open about how that kind of thing works. The main tools that we talk about using, I mentioned asymmetric cryptography a lot. So all of the nodes have these signing keys built into the node. So you think about it this way, each node has a key here, and that key is actually the signing key that you're using. Oh, looks like this didn't change. One sec. So inside of your desktop node, you have your signing key, and you have multiple keys actually for each task. And so each node operator has a whole bunch of different keys. And so even if somebody's able to pull out like a quantum system, they would have to hack all of these different keys, each of which take like about a week with a quantum computer. The more keys you have and the more nodes you have, the more stable your network kind of becomes. If anybody's not familiar with kind of asymmetric cryptography, I'll go through a short example in a second to show off how that works. The other thing that we talk about a lot is this idea of deterministic processes. And so what that means mostly is when you have say a task where it's running an audit mechanism. If you're looking at, like, for example, our white paper here, The reason that we can audit the tasks is because we can repeat the work that was done here. So as long as the work is repeatable and you can come out to the same submission value by repeating the work, then you can verify that the work was done correctly. And so you have to have processes that can be audited that way. Otherwise, it's very hard to get things to run smoothly. And then finally, aggregating multiple perspectives is a really powerful thing you can do with Koii. So by being able to have all of these different nodes all doing the same work, you can effectively verify that the work's been done properly across the system. And that makes a gigantic difference in terms of ensuring that things are being done as you would expect them to be. So something like Google or Facebook could run on top of a network like this. And we've actually got people from Google building search engines and some former social media executives building new social media networks on top of this. And so what you can do there is, like for something like Google, as opposed to Google taking a data center and using it to crawl the internet, if you do that from Koii, then you're able to get a lot more data from a lot of different people's perspectives. And you can pull in a ton of information from across the web and then use that to create a much more clear picture of what's going on. The asymmetric cryptography bit is all about having someone like Alice here and someone like Bob here and some kind of Bitcoin vampire in the middle. And so if Alice wants to talk to Bob, we want the Bitcoin vampire to not be able to see all of Alice's messages. And so what we have for that structure is we have 4 primitives. So there's a sign and then there's a verify. And you'll see that when you verify something, you pass in the public key of the sender. We take Alice's public key, and we're able to verify the signature that she sent when she signed it. So she takes her message and her private key, and she never has to send her private key out to the world, but we can take her signature and her public key and verify that the signature on the message is correct, which gives you a true or false. So then Bob can be sure that he's talking to Alice. And then at the same time, we're also able to encrypt things, which is you can take a message and a public key, and then Alice can encrypt something that only Bob can read. And even if the Bitcoin vampire gets his hands on it, he can't actually take that message and read it. And in the same way, Bob can then decrypt that message using his private key on that side. So this would be Bob's public key and then Bob's private key here. And he can take that encrypted message and then he can get the message back. But nobody except Bob can do this because Bob's the only one with Bob's private key. And so we take advantage of this a lot to build these peer-to-peer systems. It's what a lot of the internet's already based on. So in a big way, HTTPS runs on this, and most of the systems that you already use every day all run on this. With Web3, you're able to build it a lot more composably, though, because most of the users already have a public and private key, and most of those people are very secure about how they hold on to them. So if someone has a crypto wallet, then you can use their crypto wallet to build these kinds of very complex encryption and decryption schemas. Sorry, I see a couple questions popping up. Okay, Yar doesn't understand if a DeFi project and its smart contracts need to be run on a node. So the trick is you can run the DeFi components of it on the actual blockchain layer on K2, which is a separate set of nodes. So there's 2 groups of nodes on Koii. There's K2, which processes transactions and runs smart contracts, and then there's a task nodes on top of them. So the task nodes is about 88,000 of them, do all the kind of compute workloads that can store data for you, that can host UIs and host REST APIs and host databases and all that kind of stuff. And then on the blockchain layer, you have a little bit more bespoke code base that can be used exactly like Solana to host programs and any kind of like core application logic. And that's where your business logic should happen. So if you have something that's custodying funds and then hosting a UI, you can have your UI live on all the task nodes, and all the database about the users and kind of any kind of information about analytics, all of that can live on task nodes. And then the core of the network, the actual decentralized exchange where you're custodying funds, lives on the program on the K2 layer. And that's very similar to deploying Solana programs. We have some tutorials coming out about that next week, actually, because one of our new projects is custodying funds. So we're hoping to have some more tutorial content for you guys on that. These webinar series will be running every week as well, and so we'll have a bunch of that stuff that you can go through. I saw using Koii Network for federated ML from Pius. That's definitely something we can do. Orca Compute has a really good structure for that. So there's a really great project called Orca that's been built on the network. And if you go to docs.orcacompute.com, you can see how to use the Docker containers. And that's a really great application for federated ML. We actually have an open bounty for anybody who implements a working version of gradual consensus with federated ML. And so if you follow our white paper and you follow that structure of like audits and distributions, and then you can make that work with Orca containers for federated ML, we're giving out like a $10,000 prize for that, even just for like a really good white paper that gets it going in that direction. And Crypto Mana said, do you see the Koii Network as a platform for meme coins since it's a fork of Solana? Not really. I mean, personally, I love the idea of trading meme coins. I don't like the idea of getting dumped on when I'm trading meme coins. So my goal is mostly that Koii is a very good platform for people to build real applications. If you wanted to use a meme coin, though, you can use meme coins as a good way of setting up a Koii task. And so if you can get a Koii task group together that does something fun, like, for example, Bumbacat as a meme coin, and if you go to Bumbacat's website, you can see their meme coin and all the stuff going on with it. And so Bumbacat is using their meme coin to incentivize people to run this task. And I think actually in the next couple of weeks, they're going to be forking their code base or forking their token over to Koii. And so be able to earn the Bumbacat meme coin for running this task on the nodes. And that can create some kind of fun tokenomics that make the meme coins a little bit more exciting. And it actually can start to create real value, which can always be fun. Yeah, there's a few different layers to this. Getting just pure meme coins is always a little tricky. I find those can be a little bit destructive from a tokenomics standpoint, because usually the last person who participates in them is the one that gets burned. So we've tried to discourage that as much as possible. I just found the solution to our problem with the deployment, so I'm going to hop back over here and show you guys how to do that. It looks like the issue is the @latest flag. So oh, I think I installed, yeah, so I installed the old version. So if you're trying to install this right now, what you want to be doing is using the @latest like this. And if you have it already installed, then you need to delete it and then reinstall it. So let's try npm remove r. I think it's npm remove @_Koii/create task supply. There we go. And then now we can run this @latest and it should work this time. We'll see. It may also just not be working on certain device types. The team just tested it on Ubuntu and that seems to be working. I usually use Ubuntu for most of this kind of stuff, but it's not as good for live streaming. Yeah, it looks like still some issues here. So I'm going to check in with the team there and see what we can do for you guys. We'll probably get back to you in about
Try using Node version 21. Try using Node version 21.
that could work too, yeah. So you guys got it working then? Hey, there we go. Yeah. Nice, good trick. Cool. Yeah, so Carol, I think that's the main thing for what you're running into. You have to use Node version 21. Quick way to fix that is use NVM to switch your Node version. And I can pass in a quick link about how to do that, actually, because it's not a super common tool for most people if you're not familiar. Nice. Thank you for the assist, Avi. For those of you that don't know, Avi is our new head of DevRel, and has been actually the one who's the most tuned in on a lot of this stuff. I'm filling in for him today because he's going on vacation, but he's still here to help because he's awesome. So thank you, Avi. Generally, latest the NPM version is going to be the best. And yeah, if you switch to version 21, then you'll have an easier time. We'll probably put a note about that in the video notes so that we don't miss this next time. Probably a good thing to put in the sandbox as well. So then our task is actually deployed here now. So we can see this task ID popped up. So if we want to go into the desktop node now, we should be able to actually run it. We'll pop in here and you'll see it says we want to stake 1.9 Koii. And then it's still loading the task metadata. Sometimes this takes a minute or two, but it doesn't take too long. So we can probably just wait and watch it. A little bit slow. We're still working on making this a bit faster. There's an IPFS cluster where most of this data is. Boom, there it is. So we click start task, and now this should get going, and we'll see it pop up in the desktop node. Dun, da, da, da. It's going away. These can be a little bit slower because what's happening right now in the background is it's downloading the executable file from IPFS as well. So it's got to upload the metadata to IPFS and the executable file, which we just did that a second ago. So it has to propagate out. IPFS is a distributed group of nodes, so it's not always on all the gateways or all the nodes at the same time. And then when we saw it pop up saying we were ready to play there, what it's saying is the metadata file is ready to play, but the metadata file is a pretty small file relative to the size of the actual main.js. So usually the smaller file will propagate faster through the network. These are things that decentralized computing still hasn't quite gotten perfect yet, but we're working on making it better. The good news is the more Koii nodes that we get, the faster all of this stuff gets. So as the network continues to grow, we hope to see most of this stuff kind of progressively get easier. While we're waiting for that nice little bouncy wheel there, Crypto Mana said, I know you probably can't answer this, but I'll ask anyways. Any extra incentives for Koii node users before launch? So there's two big ones. The first one is that if you have Koii nodes, we got blue and hilarious. If you do have your Koii node turned on, then you're qualified to be part of our crowd sale, which should be at a lower price than any public sales that we do. So you're going to get a discount on your tokens when you buy them. That's the number one thing. The second thing is you also are going to be the first people that get to actually join all of these KPL token tasks, which are going to issue new tokens into the network. So I mentioned that we've got Wei from ADOT, who's building like a Google competitor on Koii. When he launches a token on Koii, you'll be able to stake Koii tokens to get in on that new token. There's a whole bunch more like that coming out in the future. So you want to stay tuned, make sure that your node is online, that you have the highest reputation possible. High reputation means your node's online, it doesn't go offline, it's still got a good, it's still got like tokens staked. And the more tokens you stake and the more your node is online, the higher your reputation goes and the more access you get to all these new things that come out. So yeah, that's the main incentive. If you are a developer and you want to launch something really cool, there's also the opportunity to get into our Ocean protocol, or Ocean program rather, and we'll help you actually launch your own project on Koii. And that also you get priority if you have had your node staked for longer. So please keep your nodes online, and that is really what makes the network valuable. So the more of us that do it, the whole thing just goes up exponentially. Yeah, so here's our webinar example task. You can see it's got bounty 0, top stake 0, total stake 0, nodes 0. It's still setting up, and it's just at the beginning, and we didn't fill in any of the fields. So it's just the very beginning of setting up this task, but it's up and running. And if we want to, we can actually go see it in our browser, and we should see that same endpoint that we had from before. So I'll pull this one up here. /task, and then /task ID, and then it should be webinar. Boom, there's our hello world again. So the cool thing is this is now coming from that new task ID, and any of you who run that task ID, I can drop it in here actually, and all of you guys can join if you want. If you run this task on your nodes, you'll also be able to see this new endpoint. The whole idea of the network, though, is to incentivize people to keep running nodes and keep supporting more projects. So yeah, you can definitely sell your tokens, but you'll be missing out on the future of the network, which is the real golden ticket. Not financial advice, obviously, but the time to sell is definitely not at the launch. That's probably the most likely time to lose money on selling, because after we launch the token, we expect to continue growing the network considerably. So you'll just be missing out on all of that. Ask Avinash as well. He's there. He's got his Telegram handle that he just posted. I would suggest DMing him if you're a developer and want to keep building on Koii. We're setting up some Slack channels and things like that. And yeah, you definitely can play multimedia from the nodes. One of the coolest things about Koii nodes is that they're effectively just little servers. And so each task is its own little VM server on your device. And if you get all these different devices together, you can even stream from them directly. In fact, I think actually when Avi's back next week, he's going to get a demo up of his tic-tac-toe game, which is a really good media streaming example code that you can use. And it actually covers, I guess, taking it back to our slideshow here, the task that he built actually covers a lot of the signing and verifying and being able to have multiple people publishing data onto these Koii nodes. And there's a whole bunch more of that coming down the pipeline as well. I'll quickly skim through the last of these slides and see if anybody has any more questions about the kind of key basics. We mentioned Alice Bob and the Bitcoin Vampire. There's sign, verify, encrypt, and decrypt. So these are your core fundamentals that allow you to have identities and keep privacy on these networks. The interesting thing about multimedia stuff is you can even let people upload things onto the nodes as long as you prevent them from spamming it. And so that's where you want to kind of include fees or something like that to slow things down a bit, because you don't want anybody to be able to upload. You want to know that the people that are uploading are, solid people or at least real people. Deterministic processes are also interesting. The previous way of doing this was to have deterministic machines, so EVM or Solana virtual machine. What I mentioned before is those are those have a tendency to be very expensive, and they also have some limitations. So you can't access external information, and there's limitations in terms of what you can actually run on them. Like you can only run either Solidity or Rust in this case. And you also can't host things like REST APIs. Like all the calls have to go through RPC, and the amount of data that you can put on these networks is very small. So like a Solana contract has only like 32 kilobytes of heap space, which is not enough to host even like one song. Whereas if you're using these task nodes, you have a lot more data space, and it's a lot cheaper because you can hand things out in a way where you only have each node doing one job, which saves a lot of time. These repeatable operations are really important to being able to audit things properly. And then the cool thing about this that we're working on now is we've got a whole bunch of libraries from the last 20 years of web development that we're working on integrating. And so things like media development and things like that, once somebody does it once on Koii and there's a standard for it, then we can actually make a protocol, and you can have a generic protocol that does media streaming on Koii. So we're working on making a lot of that stuff much easier for you guys. If you're trying to create a wallet for Koii, you want to use the Koii CLI. So that's actually in our it's also in our docs. I'll just pull that up. I think you can search it on Google even, and it comes up pretty easily. Yeah, so inside the Koii CLI suite. And then it's a create task CLI for deploying things, but you want this Koii CLI here, which is going to show you how to create a wallet. And it's actually the first thing in there is generating a Koii wallet. So you can follow the tutorial here to get access to that. I'll drop that in the chat as well. The other thing that you can get as well is the Finny wallet, which has been growing pretty rapidly. Now 30,000 users. And wow, we've got a 4.5 average stars. That's pretty good. Give us a thumbs up on here. Help us get our stars up. But the Finny wallet is pretty great. I think this has been resolved now. It's too bad. I'll have to go help him out. Finny is now about 30,000 users, but it looks just like MetaMask. It's a very convenient wallet standard. The thing is, if you're developing, you don't want a desktop wallet or a Chrome extension. You actually want like a CLI wallet, so the command line interface is a little easier. And if you want tokens right now, if you send me your pub key in the chat, I will drop you enough tokens to deploy your first Koii task. So go ahead and drop them in there, and happy to help you guys out. With that, I want to hop back over to the slides really quick. Collateralization is a little bit of a problem. So you actually don't want to let people just pay to attack the system generally. So you see this a lot in cryptos where somebody is talking about securing a network, but then what they actually say is we're going to get people to stake tokens. You don't want to just stake tokens, because if you're only staking tokens, then somebody can pay to attack the network. And that's where you get to this point of like, you're kind of bribing politicians almost. And if you can bribe the nodes to misbehave, then it's not really worth it, right? The whole system isn't really that reliable. I'm going to drop some tokens out to you guys now. I'll give you each 250 Koii, which should be enough to deploy a task and then update it once or twice. Let's say 300. You guys all sat through this long demonstration, so thank you for paying attention. Armando, you're sent. Alu, yours are coming. If anybody else here is listening and you want to get some free tokens to work on building your first Koii task, you can also follow up with Avi using his Telegram link up above, and we can help you out there as well. So yeah, this collateralization thing has problems. So what we recommend doing instead is reputation. The way reputation works is we want to reduce this concept of a replication factor. And so all these different nodes, we only want each node to do things once or twice. We don't want all the nodes to have to do it. So here you can see that we're writing this one in, and we want to put it on this node, and this node, but we'll leave these nodes out because that would be a waste of money. And so generally the way this goes is the higher your reputation is, the more you can be trusted as a replication node. And so if a really high reputation node is doing something, we need less other people to check it. Whereas if someone with low reputation is doing something, we need a lot of other people to check it because we can't necessarily trust the low reputation nodes. Reputation in this context is mostly like, how long has this node been running the task? Think of it as like a derivative of proof over time. So if your node's been running the task for a long time, you have higher reputation and we can trust you more. So you only need to do things once, so you can also get paid more. This is a really good way of reducing the waste in the system a little bit. So anybody have any questions about any of this so far? This is kind of the critical elements in terms of deploying Koii tasks. It's definitely really important to think of it this way. If you don't use reputation correctly, then people can just pay to attack your task, and it can slow things down a lot. Armando says, what's the minimum requirement for a node to be useful? I have old laptops. They're all going to work. It's great. I have 4 or 5 old laptops, and I'm using all of them to run Koii nodes, and I highly recommend all of you do it as well. You only need about 3 gigs of RAM, I think, so it's pretty compatible with just about everything. The only thing you're going to find with older laptops is they do use a bit more electricity, but if you're running a Koii node, it's not the same as running a Bitcoin node, so it's not about wasting electricity, and you can actually you can handle running just about any task you want on most computers because we're not wasting the electricity. We're actually using it to run useful operations, and so you can create a lot of useful work with even like a very old computer. And Armando and CryptoMana, you guys have now also received your tokens. Let me keep clicking through these slides here as we go. But is VPS for running a node encouraged? What you'll find with VPS is actually a lot of tasks don't work as well on VPS. So VPS is really good for tasks that host REST APIs or tasks that are storing content because they usually have lower latency. You know, if it's in a cloud environment, then it tends to be a little easier. What you will also find though is if you are running a task on a desktop, you're going to get a lot more flexibility in what you can do with it. So for example, a lot of the tasks right now are scraping Twitter, where you need a lot of unique IP addresses. And so if you don't have those unique IP addresses, it's very hard to run those tasks. But you want to put this all in the environment object for your task. So when you go in config, when you go into config.yaml, you can specify I want this node to have a unique IP address, for example, which is going to make things a little bit easier. And it just depends on which kind of tasks you're running. That's really the main thing. These Koii crawler tasks are a pretty good example of how audits can work. We talked about this a bunch earlier, but I'm going to go over one more time just to make sure it really sinks in. The idea here is when you are doing the task, you're being asked to fetch information from a web page and then publish the result. And then when you audit it, you're going to fetch the same information and verify that it matches what was published. And this might sound like silly to reinforce this so much, but that's really how these tasks work. You have to be able to do something once and then verify that it was done correctly. And as long as you can verify it was done correctly, you don't need any fancy ZK proofs. You don't need any kind of like fancy super architecture. You don't need a computer science PhD. You can pretty much do it if you're just like even like a basic JavaScript hacker. The trick here though too is if you can repeat this process, then you can also verify the value of the work done. And so you can go and check the value of what was created. And so you can go look at all the data that was submitted. You can see how hard it would be to submit that same data, and then you can calculate a number to say, okay, you scraped 50 web pages, this other guy only scraped 2, so you get a big reward and they get a little one. And that kind of helps a lot. How does another node determine which data to check? Yeah, so that goes into the task itself. And so you want to create your task object in such a way that inside of that submission payload, the node is deciding what to do. One of the things you can do though is you can look at the previous submissions on chain. And so the task node actually has this built in. I'll just pop up here and I can show you in VS Code. So if we go into one of these submission objects here, you can type something like namespace wrapper dot get task state. And then that will return an array. And that array that it returns includes a list of all of the staked nodes. It's going to look just like the one that I showed you in the Block Explorer before. So here, it looks just like this task state. And so you not only get all the submissions, but you also get the list of staked nodes, which we didn't get down to that, but there's a list right here called the stake list. And so you can see all the nodes that are staked, and you can decide based on the previous submissions and the list of the staked nodes, you can decide which task or which data to scrape next. So for example, if you're going through Twitter and you're looking at all the tweets, you can see the old tweets that were previously scraped from the submission list, and then you can decide which ones to scrape next and which ones have the most value. But you really want to break this down into something that works well on each node individually, so that the nodes can all work together to solve the big problem. And we're pretty able to help you with that too. So if you get a basic MVP out, we can help you make it better. We have a weekly meeting actually where we go through this, and we call it the I hack your Koii tasks meeting, because it started out with me getting everybody in the room and then hacking their Koii tasks. But now we actually all sit down and we all hack each other's Koii tasks for a couple hours. And we encourage anybody who's working on a Koii task to actually join in on that, and we can help you figure out how to make your task more reliable. And I see Yar also asked, does the project have any open source development tasks that one can participate in? Yeah, I think a lot of those have to do with making Koii task templates. So if you go and look at the existing task templates in the Easy Sandbox, we're very excited to have people participate there on the Easy Sandbox repo. So that one's over here on the Koii.network/EC Sandbox. But generally speaking, anything that's shown in this, we offer bug bounties. So all of these tasks are things that we accept bug bounties on. And you can also click on any of the existing tasks in here. For example, the Are We Verifier, and you can click Inspect Code, and you get the repo for this one. And then you can leave issues and pull requests on that, and we'd be really happy to accept them. It's one of those things where we would love to get feedback on all of these things, and if anybody leaves feedback or issues, we'll be very likely to give you a bounty in either Koii tokens or sometimes even USDC if you do a big project. It is all retroactive, so we don't usually offer bounties in advance because it's hard to know what people will do. Like it's hard to know what kind of projects and contributions people will make, but we're a pretty honest group of people, and we really like helping the community grow. So, you know, if you build something, we're really here to help. I think that was all the questions that I saw in there. There are a couple slides left in this one, but we can probably save them for later. Yeah, there's not too much more going in there. I think we can probably wrap things up here. I'm going to send out a couple more tokens to a few of you guys that have posted your names in here. And if anybody else has any other questions, this is a good time to either turn your camera on or drop them in the chat, and we can go through those. But I've been on here for a long time. I've been talking for 2 hours straight, so I'm pretty ready to take a little break and drink some water and go back and do my day job. Just lots of handles. Cool. I think I've sent you guys all tokens now. They should show up in your wallet in a second there. So you can click that little refresh button, and you should see them pop up. In this recording, you'll actually all get an email from Otterpilot that'll have the full transcript for you. And then we'll probably get the email, or we'll probably get the whole webinar up on YouTube pretty soon. So you'll get an email after the end of the meeting, and you should be able to receive it there. The next webinar is next Thursday in the morning. It'll be at about 10 EST again. We're going to do the first few at 10 EST every Thursday. And then following that, we'll probably have a couple that'll be at different times so we can catch everybody on different time zones. I realize it's not super nice to have everything be on North American time. And Nicholas and others, if you don't get your tokens, you can stick around on this meeting and we can try to help you out. But I think they should show up in the next couple of minutes. I just sent like 10 or 15 in a row, so my RPC might have timed out on my end. It could get rate limited. But they should turn up. And if they don't, then you can always hop into the Discord and ask our team, and we'll be happy to try and help you out. I see Alu also asked, so developers should prepare to deploy app on Koii Network. Yes, that is definitely the best way you can get involved. We even have the crowdfunding portal. So our goal, we've been saying this for a while, but it's crowd build, crowdsource, and crowdfund. So that means we're here to help you build it. We can do it as a team. We want to build really cool projects that matter to your community and to you. So you tell us what matters to you and what you want to build on Koii, and then we're here to help. Avi posted his Telegram above, and we'll help you out. Once you've built something on the network, then we're here to help you crowdsource as many devices as you can, because that's how you're going to get the most value out of this. Then from there, once you've crowdsourced a bunch of devices and you've got your own app built, then we will help you crowdfund it through our Ocean platform. And that's not really up to me, you know, that's up to the community. But if the community likes what you're building, we'll help you tell your story. And if you get some access to some crowdfunding, then that can pay your rent for a few months while you build up the next layer. Nicholas, I'm sorry you're getting disabled. I assume you mean on Discord. Usually that timeout isn't too long, and unfortunately it's not from us, it's from Discord. We are working on launching a separate developer forum, which is going to be released in the next week or so. So if you signed up for this webinar, you will get an email for that one, and that'll be a little bit cleaner. It's going to be an invite only kind of thing, so anybody who's here is going to get an invite to that, and should make things a little bit easier. I think some LearnFi would be really cool. We'd love to give out grants to people who go through courses. Definitely would love to support that kind of a thing. Yeah, thank you all of you for joining and for helping out. I know this is a lengthy process. Anybody who turns their camera on next time is going to get an airdrop from me, because I would love some help with some real questions. And oh yeah, we do have some open positions for ambassadors and that kind of thing. You can reach out about that on our Discord. But yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate you joining, and we'll be back next Thursday with more airdrops, prizes, and hopefully some of you have deployed a Koii task by then. Make sure that you're using Node 21 for those. Have a great day. Bye. Thanks.